You are a janitor, Hale. Stay out of the reactor room. Captain Daniel Mercer said it without looking up. The new captain stood beneath the white lights of Redstone Naval Station, one hand resting on a tablet, the other hooked behind his back. His uniform was fresh from the tailor. His boots were clean enough to catch the ceiling lights. Walter Hale stood 20 feet away with a mop in his hand. 78 years old. Gray hair. Square shoulders gone slightly forward with age. A faded navy work jacket over a gray shirt. Heavy brown boots with the leather worn smooth around the heels. He did not answer. He could not. A stroke had taken most of his speech years ago. What remained was a rough breath and a few broken sounds. He carried a small black notebook in his shirt pocket, but he rarely used it. Walter looked at Mercer. Then he looked down at the mop. He kept working. The wheels of his cleaning cart squeaked across the tile. A young reactor technician named Brooks watched him pass. "Captain told you to stay out," Brooks said. Walter stopped. Brooks pointed toward the yellow line painted across the floor. "Behind that line." Walter nodded once. He moved the cart back. That seemed to satisfy them. Mercer turned toward the control room. "Run the alarm test again." Brooks followed him. Walter stayed where he was. He wiped the floor beneath a stainless steel panel. His hands were rough and spotted with age. There was a thin white scar across his right thumb. His old military identification card sat behind the plastic window of his work badge. Nobody had asked about it. Nobody had looked twice. That was fine with Walter. He had spent most of his life letting other men talk. The reactor building had its own language. Fans turning overhead. Relays clicking behind steel panels. Pumps running somewhere below. A low vibration through the floor. Walter knew those sounds. He had known them long before Captain Mercer was born. The new captain had been at Redstone for 22 days. He had already changed 3 procedures and corrected 2 senior engineers in front of their crews. He liked clean screens. He liked numbers. He liked answers that appeared on a tablet. Walter liked machines that told the truth. There was a difference. At 9:14 that morning, the reactor operations team began a scheduled alarm test. Mercer stood behind the main console. "Everybody ready?" 6 technicians answered. Walter was outside the control room, pushing his cart. The first test tone sounded. A sharp electronic chirp. Then another. Green lights changed to amber. The technicians watched their monitors. Walter stopped pushing. His eyes moved to the control panel through the glass. One warning light stayed dark. He waited. The others changed. That one did not. Walter slowly reached into his jacket. He pulled out his small black notebook. He opened it to a page filled with numbers and short handwritten notes. Dates. Times. Equipment codes. Old pencil marks. His finger rested on one line. He looked through the glass again. Captain Mercer noticed him. He stepped toward the door and opened it. "What is it?" Walter pointed at the panel. Mercer followed his finger. "That?" Walter nodded. Mercer glanced at the display. "Everything is reading normal." Walter pointed again. Mercer sighed. "Mr. Hale, I have engineers in there. You do not need to worry about it." Walter lowered his hand. The captain closed the door. Inside, the technicians continued the test. Walter watched. His grip tightened around the notebook. The second alarm sequence began. This time, the room went quiet. Not because anyone was listening to Walter. Because one alarm that should have sounded, did not. Walter slowly set the mop against the wall. He looked at the reactor control room. Then at the old service door beside him. His eyes settled on the red emergency indicator above it. He had seen that light before. Many years ago. And when he saw it now, he did not reach for the phone. He reached for his notebook. The third alarm failed at 9:17. Nobody spoke for a second. Then Captain Mercer said, "Run the diagnostic." Brooks moved to the console. "Yes, sir." Walter Hale stood outside the glass. He watched the technician's fingers move across the keyboard. His old black notebook was still in his hand. The control room was built for men who trusted instruments. Walter had spent his life learning when not to. The diagnostic finished. "System checks good," Brooks said. Mercer frowned. "Run it again." Brooks did. The same result. 2 warning circuits responded. The third remained dead. Mercer looked through the glass and saw Walter. The old custodian was still watching the panel. "Don't tell me," Mercer said quietly. Brooks glanced toward him. "What?" "The relay." Brooks gave a short laugh. "You mean Hale's relay?" Mercer said nothing. Brooks shook his head. "It's an old circuit. We replaced the control module 6 years ago." Walter lifted one finger and pointed toward the wall. Brooks noticed. "What is he doing?" Mercer opened the door. "Hale." Walter approached slowly. Mercer held up the sheet of paper Walter had written on earlier. "You think this is the problem?" Walter nodded. "You have no reactor certification." Walter nodded again. "You're not part of this team." Another nod. Mercer stared at him. "Then why do you keep pointing at that relay?" Walter took the notebook from his pocket. He opened it. Inside was a page covered with old maintenance notes. He turned it toward Mercer. At the top was a date from 1987. Below it was a hand-drawn diagram. Mercer looked at it. "Where did you get this?" Walter tapped his own name written at the bottom. Mercer looked again. "Walter Hale. Chief Petty Officer. Retired." Mercer handed the notebook back. "That was 39 years ago." Walter closed it. He pointed toward the wall one more time. Then he walked away. Brooks watched him go. "Captain," Mercer did not answer. The alarm test began again. This time, the room changed. A yellow warning appeared on one screen. Then another. The third stayed dark. A technician leaned closer. "Sir, we're losing the backup indication." Mercer stepped forward. "What?" "The backup alarm isn't confirming." "How long?" The technician looked at the clock. 7 seconds. Mercer's jaw tightened. "Stop the test." The alarm stopped. The room settled back into its normal hum. Nobody laughed now. Outside, Walter pushed his cart down the hallway. He passed the same young officers who had watched Mercer dismiss him. One of them moved aside. Walter kept walking. At the service elevator, he stopped. His hand rested on the old metal door. For a moment, he looked at his reflection in the brushed steel. Gray hair. Work jacket. Old hands. Nothing remarkable. The elevator opened. Walter stepped inside. Before the doors closed, he heard Brooks calling from the control room. "Captain." Walter turned his head. The doors shut. Inside the control room, every technician was staring at the main panel. The reactor itself was stable. But the warning system was not. Mercer looked toward the service elevator. For the first time that morning, he seemed to understand that the old man had not been watching the alarms. He had been listening to the building. And somewhere below them, behind a steel panel nobody had opened in years, an old relay clicked once. "Run the test again." Captain Daniel Mercer stood over the control console, one hand flat against the edge of the panel. Brooks looked at him. Sir, the third alarm still isn't responding. I heard you. Mercer glanced through the glass. Walter Hale was standing in the hallway beside his cleaning cart. The old man had stopped working. His mop rested against the wall. His worn navy jacket was buttoned to the collar. One hand held the handle of his cart. The other was tucked into his pocket. Mercer opened the control room door. You still watching? Walter looked at the panel. Mercer stepped into the hallway. You're a custodian, Hale. Not an engineer. Walter reached into his pocket and brought out his black notebook. Mercer gave a tired smile. Don't start that again. Walter opened the notebook. He turned to the page with the old equipment diagram. Then he pointed to a small box drawn beside the alarm circuit. Mercer looked at it. What is that supposed to prove? Walter tapped the date at the top. Mercer shook his head. That was before I was born. Walter nodded. Exactly, Mercer said. And things have changed. Walter closed the notebook. He did not argue. Mercer pointed toward the cleaning cart. Go finish your job. Walter pushed the cart away. The wheels made a soft squeak against the floor. Brooks watched him disappear around the corner. Captain, he said, maybe we should check that relay. Mercer turned. Did I ask for your opinion? No, sir. Then run the diagnostic. Brooks turned back to the console. Yes, sir. The test began again. The first warning came on. The second followed. The third remained dark. A technician leaned toward his screen. Same fault. Mercer folded his arms. Reset it. We already reset it. Do it again. The technician swallowed. Yes, sir. Outside, Walter stopped beside the service elevator. He heard a faint metallic click from behind the wall. He waited. Another click. Then silence. Walter looked down at his hands. The fingers were thick and bent from age. A white scar crossed his knuckle. His nails were clean, but the skin around them was dark from years of working with tools. He reached into his pocket. The black notebook came out again. He opened it. One line was underlined twice. Relay fails when heat builds behind panel. Walter looked toward the control room. Nobody was watching him. He walked to the service door. A young technician stepped out carrying a tool case. He nearly bumped into Walter. Watch it, old man. Walter stepped aside. The technician kept walking. Walter waited until he was gone. Then he placed his palm against the steel panel. He held it there. His eyes closed for a moment. Warm. Too warm. Walter opened the notebook and wrote 3 words. Panel is heating. He tore out the page. When Brooks came through the door, Walter handed it to him. Brooks read it. His face changed. He looked toward the panel. Then back at Walter. You felt that? Walter nodded. Brooks put his hand against the steel. His eyebrows lifted. Captain. Mercer came out. What? Brooks pointed. The panel is warm. Mercer touched it. His expression tightened. Walter stood quietly beside his cart. Mercer looked at him. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Mercer said, "Open it." Brooks reached for the tools. Walter stepped back. He had done his part. No speech. No complaint. Just an old man waiting for the younger men to catch up. The first bolt came loose. Then the second. Behind the steel cover, a thin smell of hot insulation drifted into the hallway. Walter looked at the wiring. His jaw tightened. He knew that smell. And he knew the fault was not the relay. You don't belong down here. Captain Mercer's voice came from behind Walter on the stairs. Walter stopped. The emergency flashlight hung from his right hand. He turned slowly. Mercer stood 3 steps above him, breathing hard from the descent. Walter pointed toward the lower level. Mercer shook his head. We have trained personnel for this. Walter looked at the captain. Then he pointed at the dead communication panel on the wall. Mercer glanced at it. Nothing. No lights. No response. Walter pointed down again. I'm not asking you to guess, Mercer said. I'm telling you to go back upstairs. Walter reached into his jacket and pulled out his notebook. He opened it beneath the weak flashlight beam. On one page was the old relay diagram. On another was a hand-drawn layout of the lower reactor service level. Mercer stared at the drawing. Where did you get this? Walter tapped the date. Mercer looked at him. You worked here? Walter nodded. Doing what? Walter pointed to the diagram. Then to the lower level. Mercer understood the answer. You were reactor maintenance. Walter gave one slow nod. Mercer looked away. That was 40 years ago. Walter closed the notebook. He started down the stairs. Mercer followed. The lower level was warmer. The air smelled of hot metal and old insulation. Walter stopped at the bottom. He held the flashlight low. Pipes ran along the ceiling. Electrical cabinets lined the walls. A red service light blinked at the far end. Walter watched it. 1 blink. 2. Then nothing. He walked toward it. Mercer stayed close behind. Tell me what you're looking for. Walter did not answer. He could not. He pointed toward a narrow metal cabinet. Mercer opened it. Inside were 3 rows of breakers. Walter reached toward one. Mercer caught his wrist. Don't touch anything. Walter looked down at the captain's hand. Mercer released him. Walter took 1 step back. He pointed at the breaker. Then at the floor. A faint vibration ran through the soles of their boots. Mercer felt it. His face changed. What is that? Walter crouched. He placed his palm against the concrete. The vibration came again. Short. Uneven. Walter stood. He opened his notebook. He wrote, cooling pump relay. Mercer read it. You're sure? Walter looked at him. Then nodded. Mercer reached for the radio. Control, we need a maintenance team on level 3. Only static answered. He tried again. Nothing. Walter walked to another panel. Mercer followed. Walter pointed at a small gauge. The needle was moving. Slowly. Toward the red mark. Mercer stared at it. That's not supposed to happen. Walter looked at his watch. Then at the gauge. He wrote another line. We have minutes. Mercer read the words. For the first time, he did not argue. He picked up the radio again. Brooks, shut down the test sequence. Now. Static. Mercer looked toward Walter. Walter was already moving. He opened an old metal cabinet beside the service wall. Inside was a manual control lever. Dust covered the handle. Walter wiped it clean with his sleeve. Mercer stepped closer. What does that do? Walter pointed to the gauge. Then to the lever. Mercer understood. You want to bypass the alarm circuit. Walter shook his head. He pointed lower. Another valve. Mercer looked at it. Then back at Walter. Walter placed both hands on the valve wheel. He waited. The old man's breathing stayed steady. Then he began turning it. 1/4 turn. Then another. Somewhere below them, a pump started. The vibration under their boots changed. The gauge needle moved back. Walter stopped. Mercer stared at the panel. Then at the old custodian. Walter simply wiped his hands on his work jacket. No smile. No speech. Just another job done. Then the lights went out. The alarm sounded again. Walter Hale stopped beside the old steel cabinet. He did not look at Captain Mercer. He listened. One tone. A pause. Then 3 short tones. Walter's eyes moved toward the ceiling. Mercer heard the pattern too. What does that mean? Walter pointed down the corridor. Then he held up one finger. Wait. The alarm stopped. For 5 seconds, the building was quiet. Then the first tone came back. Walter opened the maintenance log. He turned several pages until he found a marked section. His finger stopped on a handwritten line. Loss of cooling pressure. Secondary warning delayed. Mercer leaned over his shoulder. That's from 1988. Walter nodded. Mercer looked at the old equipment around them. You've seen this before. Walter pointed at the date. Then at the alarm panel. Another nod. Mercer took a slow breath. Why didn't you tell me? Walter looked at him. He reached for the notebook and wrote 3 words. You never asked. Mercer read them. He said nothing. A voice came over the radio. Captain, we've got another pressure change. Mercer lifted the handset. Where? Lower service level. Pump 2. Walter immediately turned toward the stairs. Mercer caught up with him. Wait. Walter stopped. Mercer looked at the maintenance log. Then at Walter. You know where the manual controls are? Walter nodded. Show me. They moved down the corridor. Walter walked with a slight limp. His left leg dragged just enough to make his boot scrape the concrete every few steps. Mercer noticed. He also noticed something else. Walter never leaned on the walls. He never asked for help. At the end of the corridor, Walter stopped beside a locked steel door. Mercer reached for the handle. Walter shook his head. He pointed to a small panel beside it. Access. Walter shook his head again. He took his old military identification card from his pocket. The card was scratched and faded. Mercer held it under the emergency light. There was an old security number printed beneath Walter's name. Mercer entered it into the panel. The light turned green. The lock released. Mercer looked at him. That still works. Walter gave a small shrug. Inside was a narrow equipment room. Dust covered the upper shelves. The lower cabinets were newer. Walter went straight to the far wall. No hesitation. He opened a panel and pointed to a manual switch. Mercer looked at it. How did you know that was here? Walter tapped the old maintenance log. Then he tapped his chest. Mercer understood. You installed it. Walter nodded. A loud warning tone sounded behind them. Mercer looked toward the hallway. Pressure is dropping. Walter moved to the switch. Mercer stopped him. Tell me what happens if you pull it. Walter opened his notebook. He wrote, Pump 2 will bypass the failed control relay. Mercer read it. And if you're wrong? Walter looked at him. Then he pointed to the pressure gauge. The needle was already moving toward the red. Mercer looked at the gauge. Then at Walter. Do it. Walter pulled the switch. A heavy mechanical clunk came from below. The pump started. The pressure needle moved. Slowly. Back toward green. Mercer let out a breath. Walter released the switch. His hand was steady. No celebration. No smile. He simply closed the panel. The radio crackled. "Captain, pressure is stabilizing." Mercer looked at Walter. The old custodian picked up his notebook. On the inside cover, beneath years of stains and worn edges, was a faded naval emblem. Mercer stared at it. "Chief Hale," he said quietly. Walter looked up. Mercer had finally used the rank. Walter gave one small nod. Then another alarm sounded above them. This time, Mercer did not give the order. He looked at Walter. And waited. "Chief Hale, sir." The voice on the radio was older than Captain Mercer expected. Mercer looked at Walter. The old custodian stood beside the valve, his worn jacket sleeve pulled back over his forearm. The faded tattoo was barely visible now. Mercer held out the radio. Walter did not take it. He pointed toward the control room. Then toward the pressure gauge. "Work first." Mercer understood. "Command, he's busy." There was a pause. Then the voice answered. "Understood. Tell him General Whitmore is on his way." Mercer lowered the radio. Brooks stared at him. "General?" Mercer nodded. Walter was already walking toward the next panel. "Chief," Mercer said. Walter stopped. "Do you know General Whitmore?" Walter looked back. A small nod. Nothing more. They reached the main service corridor. The pressure readings had stabilized, but the alarm system was still down. Brooks checked his tablet. "We've got power. The reactor is steady. But the emergency warning network is still offline." Mercer looked at Walter. "What would you check?" Walter pointed toward the ceiling. "The communication trunk?" Walter nodded. Brooks pulled up the current system diagram. "There's a backup line running through the old maintenance shaft." Walter shook his head. He took the tablet from Brooks. He studied the diagram for several seconds. Then he pointed to a section marked in blue. "What's wrong?" Walter tapped the screen twice. Brooks zoomed in. "The line goes through the old pump room." Walter nodded. Mercer looked at him. "You think the heat damaged the cable?" Walter shook his head. He pointed toward the lower floor. Then made a twisting motion with his hand. Brooks understood. "Moisture?" Walter nodded. They moved quickly. The old pump room was at the end of a narrow passage. Walter walked with his slight limp, but he did not slow down. Mercer noticed that he never looked at the floor signs. He knew where he was going. At the pump room door, Walter stopped. He placed his palm against the metal. Then he pointed at the bottom edge. A thin line of water had collected beneath the door. Brooks opened it. Water covered part of the concrete floor. A cable conduit ran through it. Brooks swore under his breath. Mercer looked at Walter. "You knew." Walter shook his head. He pointed toward the ceiling. A small pipe above them was dripping. Walter walked beneath it. He followed the pipe to a shut-off valve. The handle was frozen. Mercer stepped forward. "I'll get maintenance." Walter shook his head. He reached into his work cart. From beneath the cleaning supplies, he pulled a small leather tool pouch. It was old. Very old. The stitching was dark with age. He opened it. Inside were a few hand tools, a short wrench, and a flat screwdriver with a wooden handle. Brooks stared. "You carry that around?" Walter nodded. He fitted the wrench over the valve. The first pull did nothing. He adjusted his grip. The second pull moved it. Water slowed. Then stopped. Walter wiped the wrench with a rag and put it back. Mercer stared at the pouch. "You've been carrying that all this time?" Walter closed it. He looked at the captain. Then pointed toward the cable. The point was clear. The tools were not the important part. Knowing when to use them was. Brooks checked the panel. The line is coming back. One light turned green. Then another. The alarm network began restoring itself. Mercer looked toward Walter. The old man was already picking up his mop. The radio crackled again. Captain Mercer, General Whitmore is entering the facility. Mercer looked toward the hallway. Walter pushed his cart away. Then Mercer heard the general's voice over the radio. "Where is Chief Hale?" Mercer stopped. He looked at the old man's back. For the first time, he understood something simple. Walter Hale had not wandered into the reactor building by accident. He had been coming back to work. The emergency phone rang once. Walter Hale picked it up. "Chief Hale." The voice on the other end was calm. "Command wants your assessment." Walter looked at Captain Mercer. Mercer said nothing. Walter reached for the notebook. He wrote one line. "Alarm failure is secondary." He turned the page. "The real fault is still active." Mercer read it. "Where?" Walter pointed toward the control room. Then toward the floor. Then he tapped the old maintenance log. Brooks followed him to the main panel. "Sir, the alarm network is coming back." Walter shook his head. Brooks frowned. "It is." Walter pointed at one green light. Then another. Then the pressure gauge. The third gauge was still moving. Slowly. Up. Mercer saw it. "Brooks." "Yes, sir." "Read that pressure." 208. Walter tapped his notebook. Brooks looked. A number was circled. 220. His face tightened. "What happens at 220? Walter did not answer. He pointed toward the emergency shutoff. Mercer understood. "Automatic trip?" Walter nodded. Brooks stepped back. "Then we have less than a minute." Mercer grabbed the radio. "All personnel, clear the lower level." Walter shook his head. He pointed toward the manual control panel. Mercer looked at him. "What?" Walter opened the old maintenance log. A hand-drawn sequence filled the page. 4 switches. 1 valve. A delay. Mercer stared at it. "You know how to stop this." Walter nodded. "Can you do it?" Walter looked at the panel. Then at Mercer. He reached for the controls. Mercer moved aside. Walter's hands went to work. Switch 1. Wait. Switch 2. The pressure climbed. 214. Walter did not rush. Switch 3. The warning light turned red. Brooks looked at the gauge. 218. Walter reached for the final switch. Mercer grabbed his arm. "What happens if you miss?" Walter looked at him. Then pointed at the old log. Mercer read the handwritten note. "Do not trip all 4 at once." He released Walter. Walter waited. 219. 1 second. 220. The alarm screamed. Walter pulled the final switch. The pressure dropped. The alarm stopped. Silence. Nobody moved. Brooks stared at the gauge. 203. Walter released the switch. His hands were steady. Captain Mercer looked at him. "How did you know?" Walter closed the panel. He took the notebook and wrote, "Because I built the sequence." Mercer read the words. Brooks looked at the old maintenance log. Then he turned it over. A typed page was attached to the back. At the bottom were several signatures. One belonged to Walter Hale. Another belonged to a name Mercer recognized from the command directory. General Whitmore. Mercer looked at the page again. You worked directly with him. Walter nodded. The front doors opened upstairs. Footsteps moved quickly through the building. A voice called from the corridor. Where is Chief Hale? General Whitmore appeared at the doorway. He looked at the panel. Then at Walter. Then at the captain. Who authorized him to work the controls? Mercer straightened. I did, sir. Whitmore looked at him for a long second. Good. Then the general turned to Walter. Chief, is it safe? Walter looked at the gauges. He checked the panel. He waited. Then he nodded. Whitmore gave one short nod back. Then we are done. Mercer looked down at Walter's old notebook. His earlier words came back to him. You are a custodian now. The captain's face tightened. He had said it like the rank erased everything that came before. Now the old log sat open in his hands. Dates. Repairs. Emergency procedures. Walter's signature. Years of service. Mercer looked at the old man. Walter was already putting the tools away. No demand. No victory speech. Just a tired hand closing the leather pouch. And that was when Mercer finally understood what had made his own arrogance look so small. Walter had never needed to prove who he was. The work had already done it. Captain, you owe that man more than an apology. General Whitmore said it quietly. Captain Mercer stood beside the control console, eyes fixed on the old maintenance log. Yes, sir. Whitmore closed the folder. You'll give him the apology. Then you'll make sure your crew learns why. Mercer nodded. Across the room, Walter Hale was putting his tools away. The same leather pouch. The same worn screwdriver. The same careful movements. He did not look toward them. Brooks approached him first. Chief. Walter turned. Brooks held out a cup of coffee. I figured you could use this. Walter looked at the cup. Then at Brooks. He accepted it with both hands. Thank you, Brooks said. Walter gave one small nod. Another technician stepped forward. Chief, that log from 1988, was that really you? Walter opened his notebook. He wrote, yes. The technician looked at the answer. Then at Walter's hands. I've been working here 6 years, he said. I never knew. Walter closed the notebook. You never asked, Mercer said from behind him. Walter turned. Mercer looked at the floor for a moment. I said that to you earlier. Walter nodded. Mercer took off his cover. I was wrong. The room stayed quiet. Walter did not make him repeat it. He simply nodded once. Mercer put his cover back on. Then he turned to his crew. Listen carefully. Everyone faced him. Chief Hale's access to this facility is not going to be treated like a courtesy anymore. If he says a system sounds wrong, looks wrong, or feels wrong, you stop and check it. Brooks nodded. Yes, sir. Mercer continued. And if anyone here thinks a man's age, job title, or limp tells you what he knows, he stopped. His eyes moved across the room. Then you have some learning to do. Nobody laughed. Nobody looked away. General Whitmore watched from the doorway. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Later that afternoon, the station commander reviewed the incident report. Mercer stood beside him. The report listed every alarm failure. Every missed warning. Every correction Walter had made. At the bottom was a note. Primary Technical Intervention, Chief Petty Officer Walter Hale, retired. The commander looked up. You didn't know who he was? No, sir. The commander leaned back. Why not? Mercer had no good answer. He looked through the office window. Walter was outside, cleaning the concrete walkway. A light wind moved his gray hair. His old navy jacket hung loose across his shoulders. His cart stood beside him. Nothing about him suggested the events of the morning. No medals. No speech. No need for attention. Just work. The commander closed the report. Make sure the record reflects his contribution. Yes, sir. Mercer left the office. He found Walter near the main entrance. Chief. Walter looked up. Mercer held out a new access badge. Walter looked at it. Then at him. You've earned this back. Walter took the badge. He turned it over. The photograph was old. The name was still the same. Walter Hale. Chief Petty Officer. Retired. Walter slipped it into his jacket pocket. Then he picked up his mop. Mercer watched him walk away. A young sailor held the door open for Walter. After you, Chief. Walter nodded. The door closed behind him. Mercer stood there for a moment. The man he had dismissed that morning had walked through the same doorway 40 years earlier in uniform. The building had remembered him. The people had not. Now they did. And that was the price of arrogance. Not punishment. Not shouting. Just the quiet moment when a man finally realizes he had been standing beneath someone else's shadow all along. The next morning, Walter Hale arrived before sunrise. He parked his old truck in the same corner of the lot he had used for years. No special space. No reserved sign. Just cracked pavement, a faded line, and a little oil stain beneath the truck. He climbed out slowly. The limp was still there. So was the old navy jacket. Walter carried his leather tool pouch in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other. At the maintenance entrance, Captain Mercer was waiting. He held up another cup. Black. No sugar. Walter looked at it. Then at Mercer. He took the cup. A small nod. Thank you, Chief, Mercer said. Walter raised one eyebrow. Mercer smiled. Still getting used to that. Walter walked inside. The morning crew was already gathering near the control room. Brooks saw him first. Morning, Chief. Walter nodded. Another technician stepped aside and held the door. Go ahead. Walter stopped. He looked at the young man. Then he looked at the door. He gave a small nod and walked through. Nobody made a joke. Nobody called him old man. The difference was simple. They had learned his name. Later that morning, the station commander called Walter into the office. Walter sat in the chair near the door. His cap rested on his knee. The commander placed a folder on the desk. We reviewed the incident report. Walter waited. The station is adding your old emergency procedures to the current training manual. Walter looked at the folder. Then at the commander. He opened his notebook. He wrote, make sure they update the wiring diagram too. The commander smiled. That was the next item. Walter nodded. He closed the notebook. The commander slid another paper across the desk. This is a formal commendation. Walter looked at it. He pushed it gently back. The commander frowned. You don't want it? Walter shook his head. He wrote, give it to the crew. The commander looked at him. They didn't do the work. Walter pointed toward the door. Then toward the building. He wrote, they will next time. The commander leaned back. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he took the paper. All right. Walter stood. He picked up his cap. At the door, the commander called after him. Chief. Walter turned. Thank you. Walter nodded once. That was enough. Outside, Captain Mercer was waiting. What did he want? Walter pointed toward the office. Then toward the control room. Mercer understood. Training manual. Walter nodded. Mercer smiled. You're not getting away from this place, are you? Walter shook his head. He tapped the old badge in his pocket. Then he pointed toward the maintenance building. Work. Mercer laughed softly. Fair enough. That afternoon, a group of young cadets came through the facility. They were the same kind of young men and women Mercer had been only a short time before. Clean uniforms. New boots. New equipment. They walked past Walter without much notice. One cadet glanced at his mop. Then at the old badge on his jacket. He whispered something to another cadet. The second one laughed. Mercer heard it. He stopped walking. Come here. Both cadets turned. Yes, Captain. Mercer pointed toward Walter. Do you know who that is? They shook their heads. Mercer looked at Walter. Walter was checking a maintenance cabinet. He is Chief Petty Officer Walter Hale. The cadet stood straighter. Mercer continued. He worked these systems before your parents were old enough to drive. The first cadet looked embarrassed. Mercer shook his head. Don't apologize to me. The cadet walked toward Walter. Chief. Walter turned. The young man removed his cap. I'm sorry, Chief. Walter studied him for a moment. Then he pointed toward the cabinet. The cadet looked confused. Mercer smiled. He's telling you to learn something. The cadet nodded. Yes, Chief. Walter handed him the screwdriver. The young man took it carefully. Walter pointed to the panel. Work first. Respect followed. That evening, Walter left the station as the sun was going down. The new badge sat in his pocket. The old leather pouch was in his hand. He stopped beside his truck and looked back at the building. No ceremony. No applause. Just lights coming on behind the windows. Walter climbed into the driver's seat. He started the engine. Then he placed the coffee cup in the holder. The same plain black coffee. The same quiet man. Only now, when people saw the limp, they also saw the years behind it. And when they saw the mop, they remembered the hands holding it. Some men spend their lives asking to be remembered. Walter Hale never did. He simply kept showing up. Walter Hale left the station just before sunset. The old truck rolled across the lot, tires crunching over loose gravel. Inside the cab, his new access badge rested beside the coffee cup. He did not look at it. He kept both hands on the wheel. At the gate, Captain Mercer stood watching. Walter slowed. Mercer raised his hand. Walter gave one short nod and drove on. There was no ceremony this time. No officers. No speeches. Just the road ahead and the sound of the engine. Walter had spent most of his life that way. Do the work. Keep your word. Come home when the job is done. The next morning, his old navy jacket hung on the back of the maintenance room door. The younger sailors had started calling it the chief's jacket. Walter never corrected them. He came in at 6. Checked the reactor logs. Checked the alarm panel. Checked the old relay. Then he made coffee. At 7, Brooks walked in. Morning, Chief. Walter nodded. Brooks set a folder on the workbench. The new training manual. Walter opened it. His old emergency procedure was on page 32. His name was printed beneath it. Walter stared at the page. Then he took a pencil. Brooks leaned closer. What are you changing? Walter circled one sentence. Verify manually before resetting the alarm. Brooks read it. That's it? Walter nodded. Brooks smiled. Figures. Walter closed the folder. He picked up his coffee. Across the room, one of the young cadets from the day before was studying the old maintenance panel. He looked over. Chief. Walter turned. Can you show me how you knew the relay was bad? Walter set down his cup. He walked over. The cadet followed. Walter opened the panel. He pointed to the relay. Then to the wire. Then he tapped the metal housing with one finger. The cadet listened. Nothing. Walter tapped it again. A faint click came from inside. The cadet's eyes widened. You can hear that? Walter nodded. He closed the panel. Then he handed the young man the old screwdriver from his leather pouch. Your turn. The cadet took it. Walter stepped aside. No lecture. No speech. Just a lesson. That was how Walter had always passed things down. One job at a time. One young man at a time. By noon, the station was running normally. The reactor alarms were clean. The pressure system was steady. The training crew knew the old procedures. And Chief Walter Hale was back to mopping the hallway. A sailor walked past. He stopped. Chief. Walter looked up. The sailor gave him a sharp salute. Walter stood straighter. He returned it. The sailor lowered his hand. Walter went back to work. That was all. He did not need applause. He did not need a room full of people telling him what he had done. He had spent too many years doing his duty for that. A soldier learns something early. You do not serve because someone is watching. You serve because someone is depending on you. Walter had carried that rule through the Navy. Through old machinery. Through long nights. Through retirement. Through the limp that never quite went away. And even after the uniform came off, the habit stayed. When the alarms failed, he stepped forward. When people doubted him, he kept his mouth shut and did the work. When the truth came out, he accepted the salute and went back to work. That was Walter Hale. Not a hero because people finally noticed him. A hero because he had never needed them to. His service was not measured by the badge in his pocket. It was measured by the men who went home because he did his job. By the systems he kept running. By the promises he kept. And by the simple fact that, when duty called, he answered. Some men wear the uniform for a few years. Others carry it for the rest of their lives. Walter Hale carried his. Quietly. Proudly. And without asking anyone to remember. A soldier's honor is not in being seen. It is in standing ready when someone else needs you.